The dust cloud appeared on the horizon just after noon, and by the time Helena Sutton rode into Columbia, California on her chestnut mare, half the town had found reasons to be on Main Street watching her arrival. She sat tall in the saddle despite 3 days of hard riding, her split riding skirt dusty but her spine straight as a lodgepole pine. Her auburn hair pulled back in a practical braid that hung down past her shoulders. The July heat of 1876 shimmered off the wooden storefronts, but she did not reach for her canteen until she had guided her horse to the hitching post outside the Silver Star Hotel. Preston Quinn stood in the doorway of the general store his family owned, arms crossed over his chest, watching the woman dismount with a fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle. He was 24 years old and had seen plenty of travelers pass through Columbia in his lifetime. But something about this woman caught his attention in a way he could not immediately name. Perhaps it was the way she ignored the stares and whispers, or perhaps it was the determined set of her jaw as she tied her horse and lifted her saddlebags over her shoulder like they weighed nothing at all. "She looks like trouble," his younger brother Timothy said from behind the counter. Preston did not respond right away. He watched as the woman walked into the hotel, her boots striking the wooden boardwalk with purpose. "She looks tired," he said finally. The town of Columbia had seen better days. Once a booming gold mining town in the heart of the Mother Lode, it had settled into a quieter existence by the mid-1870s, though it still attracted enough prospectors, ranchers, and businessmen to keep the hotels and saloons running. Preston's family had arrived in 1862, when he was just 10 years old, and he had grown up helping his father build the general store into one of the most successful businesses in town. Now, with his father's health failing, Preston ran most of the day-to-day operations, and his eye for detail extended beyond inventory and accounts. He noticed things other people missed. Helena Sutton paid for 3 nights at the hotel with coins she counted out carefully, then asked the clerk where she might find the land office. The young man behind the desk looked her up and down with poorly concealed skepticism. "Land office is down the street, past the saloon," he said. "But Mr. Henderson usually takes a long lunch. You might not catch him until 3 o'clock. "Then I will wait," Helena said simply. Her voice was low and steady, with just a hint of an accent that suggested she had not grown up in California. Eastern, perhaps, or Midwestern. She took her key and climbed the narrow stairs to her room, where she finally allowed herself to sit on the edge of the bed and close her eyes. The journey from Sacramento had been longer and more difficult than she had anticipated. The stage would have been faster, but she could not afford the fare for both herself and her horse, and she would not leave Juniper behind. The mare had been a gift from her father before he died, the last tangible thing she had from him besides his letters, and the deed to 160 acres of California land she had never seen. Her father had been a dreamer, always chasing the next opportunity, the next fortune. He had moved the family from Ohio to Missouri, then Missouri to California, each time promising that this would be where they made their mark. Her mother had died of cholera on the wagon train west when Helena was 16, and after that it had been just Helena and her father, working claims that never quite paid out, moving from one mining camp to another. When he had won this land in a card game 2 years ago, he had been certain it was the sign he had been waiting for. He had traveled to Columbia to survey it, to make plans. Then he had gotten pneumonia on the return trip, and died before he could tell Helena much about the property, except that it was good land, with water and timber, and that it could be something real if someone was willing to work for it. Helena had been 22 when he died. She had spent the last 2 years working as a seamstress in Sacramento, saving every penny, learning everything she could about farming and ranching from books and from conversations with anyone who would talk to her. She had read her father's letters until the paper grew soft at the creases. And finally, when she had enough money to sustain herself for a few months, she had packed everything she owned and ridden south to claim what was hers. She washed her face in the basin, changed into a clean blouse, and went back downstairs with her father's deed folded carefully in her pocket. The dining room was nearly empty, and she ordered a simple meal of bread, cheese, and cold chicken, eating slowly and methodically while she watched the street through the window. Preston Quinn walked past the hotel twice that afternoon, telling himself he needed to check on a shipment at the freight office and then to speak with the blacksmith about some tools. Both were legitimate errands, but he could not deny that he found his gaze drawn to the hotel windows, wondering about the woman who had ridden in alone. When he finally saw her emerge and walk toward the land office, he made a decision that surprised him and crossed the street to follow at a discreet distance. The land office was a small building wedged between the assayer's office and a law firm. Helena pushed open the door and stepped inside, where a portly man with spectacles and thinning hair sat behind a desk covered in maps and paperwork. "Mr. Henderson," Helena asked. "That's right. What can I do for you, miss?" Helena pulled out the deed and laid it on the desk. "My name is Helena Sutton. My father was James Sutton. He held title to 160 acres north of town, and I am here to take possession of the property." Henderson picked up the deed and examined it, his eyebrows rising slightly. "I remember this parcel. Your father won it from Cyrus Mackenzie about 2 years back. Mackenzie was not happy about it, I can tell you that. The deed is legal, is it not?" "Oh, it is legal enough. Mackenzie had clear title and your father had witnesses to the game. It was recorded properly." Henderson looked up at her. "You planning to live out there by yourself?" "I am planning to work the land, yes." Henderson leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over his stomach. "Miss Sutton, I do not mean to be indelicate, but that is rough country. The house out there is barely more than a shack. The previous owners tried to make a go of it for a few years, but they gave up. Your father was out there only one time, as far as I know. A woman alone, well, it is not really done." Helena felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came whenever someone told her what she could not do, what was not proper, what was too difficult. She had heard variations of this speech her entire life. "Nevertheless, it is my property, and I intend to work it. I will need directions to reach it." Henderson sighed and pulled out a map, tracing a route with his finger. "You go north on the main road for about 5 miles, then there is a fork. You take the left branch and follow it another 3 miles. There is a wooden post marking the property line, though it might have fallen down by now. The house is set back from the road about a 1/4 mile near a creek." He paused. "You will need supplies. Tools, food, probably lumber for repairs. That place has been empty for a while." "I have some money set aside for supplies," Helena said. She studied the map carefully, committing the route to memory. "Quinn's General Store is your best bet for most everything you will need," Henderson said. "They are fair in their pricing, and they know what folks need for homesteading." Helena thanked him and left with the deed safely back in her pocket and the route to her property fixed in her mind. The sun was lowering in the sky, painting the false-fronted buildings in shades of gold and amber. She walked slowly back to the hotel, taking in the town that would be her nearest source of supplies and, perhaps, community. Columbia was larger than some of the mining camps she had lived in, with several saloons, a church, a schoolhouse, and rows of houses spreading out from the main street. She could hear a piano playing in one of the saloons, and somewhere a dog was barking. The next morning, Helena rose early and made her way to Quinn's general store as soon as it opened. The interior was well organized, with shelves lined with everything from canned goods to fabric to tools. A young man was sweeping the floor, and an older woman was arranging a display of ribbons near the front window. Behind the counter stood Preston Quinn, though Helena did not yet know his name. "Good morning," he said as she entered. "Can I help you find anything?" Helena pulled a list from her pocket. She had stayed up late the previous night, writing and rewriting it by lamplight, calculating what she could afford against what she absolutely needed. "I have quite a bit to purchase. I am setting up a homestead north of town." Preston took the list and read it over, his expression neutral. "This is a good list, practical. You will want to add some lamp oil, and I would recommend extra nails. You always need more than you think." He looked up at her. "You are the woman who arrived yesterday. Miss Sutton, was it?" "Helena Sutton, yes, and you are Preston Quinn. My family owns this store." He began pulling items from the shelves, stacking them on the counter. "Henderson probably told you about the property you are taking over. It has been empty for a couple of years." He mentioned that. Preston measured out 20 pounds of flour into a cloth sack, tied it off, and set it aside. "It is good land from what I understand. Plenty of water from the creek, decent timber on the back acreage. The house needs work, but the bones of it are solid." He glanced at her. "You planning to hire help?" "Not immediately. I need to see what condition everything is in first, and I need to conserve my funds." He nodded slowly, continuing to gather the items on her list. As he worked, he found himself studying her in quick glances. She was probably around his age, maybe a year or two younger, with striking green eyes and a face that was more handsome than pretty, all strong bones and determined features. Her hands, when she reached out to examine a box of nails, were work-roughened, not the soft hands of a city woman. "You have done this before," he said. It was not quite a question. "Homesteading?" "Not exactly, but I have worked hard my whole life. I learn quickly." Preston tallied up the cost of everything on her list, adding the lamp oil and extra nails he had suggested. The total made Helena's heart sink slightly, but she had expected it. She counted out the money carefully, watching her carefully saved funds diminish. "I can arrange delivery if you like," Preston offered. "We have a wagon that makes rounds to the outlying properties a couple times a week." Helena considered this. It would be difficult to carry all these supplies on horseback, and making multiple trips would waste precious time. What would delivery cost for that distance? $2. It was more than she wanted to spend, but it was practical. "All right, when can you deliver?" "Day after tomorrow in the morning. That will give you time to get out there and see what you are dealing with." As Helena turned to leave, the older woman who had been arranging ribbons approached. "Excuse me, dear. I could not help overhearing. You are going to be living out at the old Mackenzie place by yourself." "That is correct." The woman exchanged a glance with Preston. "I am Margaret Quinn, Preston's mother. That is quite an undertaking for a young woman alone. Do you have family coming to join you?" "No, madam. It is just me." Margaret's expression was troubled. "Well, if you need anything at all, you come see us. It is no shame to ask for help when you need it." Helena felt a flicker of warmth at the genuine concern in the older woman's voice, so different from the skepticism and dismissal she had encountered elsewhere. "Thank you, Mrs. Quinn. That is kind of you." After Helena left, Margaret turned to her son. "That poor girl. She has no idea what she is getting herself into." "Maybe," Preston said, watching through the window as Helena walked back toward the hotel. "Or maybe she knows exactly what she is getting into and is doing it anyway. That is not stubbornness talking, that is foolishness. A woman cannot run a homestead alone. It is too much work, too dangerous." Preston did not argue with his mother, but he found himself thinking about Helena Sutton for the rest of the day. There had been something in her eyes when she looked at that list of supplies, a mixture of fear and determination that he recognized. It was the same look he had seen in his father's eyes when they had first arrived in Colombia with almost nothing, gambling everything on the success of a store in a town that might dry up and blow away if the gold ran out. That gamble had paid off, but it had taken years of hard work and more than a few close calls. That evening, Preston walked to the saloon where many of the local men gathered after work. He found his friend David Morrison sitting at a corner table, nursing a beer. "I need to ask you about some property," Preston said, sitting down across from him. David worked as a surveyor and knew the land around Columbia better than almost anyone. "What property?" "The old Mackenzie place north of town. What do you know about it?" David scratched his beard thoughtfully. "I surveyed it a few years back when Mackenzie was thinking of selling. It is good land, maybe 160 acres like the title says. There is a year-round creek running through it, some decent grazing land, timber on the hills. The soil is good for crops if someone wants to work it. Mackenzie was trying to raise cattle, but he did not have the capital to really do it right, and he drank more than he worked. When he lost it in that card game, I think he was almost relieved. He moved on to Nevada, far as I know." "What about the buildings?" "There is a house, 1 story, maybe 3 rooms. It was rough even when I saw it. A barn that is probably half collapsed by now and some fencing that will need to be replaced. But like I said, the land itself is good. With enough work and money, someone could make something of it." David looked at Preston curiously. "Why are you asking? James Sutton's daughter just arrived in town. She is planning to work it herself." David's eyebrows rose. "By herself? That is ambitious. That is one word for it." "You think she can do it?" Preston thought about Helena's work-roughened hands, the practical list she had brought to the store, the steady look in her eyes. "I think she is going to try." The next morning, Helena packed her saddlebags with enough food and water for the day, checked Juniper's shoes and tack, and rode north out of Columbia. The sky was a brilliant blue, not a cloud in sight, and the July heat was already building. She followed the route Henderson had described, watching the landscape transition from the town's cleared areas to rolling hills covered in oak and pine. At the fork in the road, she took the left branch as instructed. The road here was less maintained, with deeper ruts and encroaching brush. She passed one small ranch, where a man mending a fence paused to watch her ride by, his expression curious but not unfriendly. She raised a hand in greeting, and he did the same. 3 miles later, she found the wooden post marking her property line. It was still standing, though weathered and leaning slightly. Her heart began to beat faster as she turned Juniper onto the narrow track leading away from the main road. This was hers. This land, these trees, whatever lay ahead, it all belonged to her. The house came into view as she rounded a bend in the track, and Helena's first reaction was a sinking feeling in her stomach. Henderson had not exaggerated. It was barely more than a shack, a rough wooden structure with a sagging porch and several windows that were either broken or missing entirely. The roof was intact, at least in most places, but she could see gaps where shingles had blown away. She dismounted and tied Juniper to a tree, then walked slowly toward the house. The door hung crooked on its hinges, and when she pushed it open, the smell of dust and mouse droppings hit her immediately. The interior was dim, with only the light from the broken windows illuminating 3 small rooms. A main room that served as kitchen and living area, and 2 smaller bedrooms. The floor was littered with debris, leaves, and the remnants of a bird's nest. A cast iron stove sat in one corner, rusted but possibly salvageable. A rough table and 2 chairs, both broken, were the only furniture. Helena stood in the center of the main room and felt tears prick at her eyes. She had known it would be bad, but seeing it in person was overwhelming. This was what her father had won, what he had thought could be something real. Had he been delusional, or had he seen something she was missing? She walked back outside and took a deep breath, forcing down the despair. She had not come all this way to give up at the first obstacle. She walked the property systematically, examining everything. The barn was indeed half collapsed, with the roof fallen in on one side, but the other half might be usable for storage. The fencing was mostly gone, just a few rotting posts marking where it had once stood. But as she walked toward the back of the property, she heard the sound of running water and found the creek Henderson had mentioned. It was beautiful, perhaps 20 feet wide, running clear and cold over smooth stones, with trees clustering along both banks. She knelt and cupped her hands in the water, drinking deeply. It was sweet and cold, the best water she had tasted in months. She sat back on her heels and looked around. Here, by the creek, she could see what her father must have seen. The potential, the possibility. She spent the rest of the day exploring the property, making notes in a small journal she carried. She found the remains of a vegetable garden, now overgrown with weeds, but showing that the soil could support crops. She found a clearing that would be perfect for a chicken coop. She found a stand of timber that could be harvested for lumber or firewood. By the time the sun began to lower, she had a better sense of what she was dealing with, and while it was daunting, it no longer felt impossible. She rode back to Columbia as dusk was settling over the land, her mind already working through plans and priorities. She would need to make the house livable first. That meant cleaning, repairing the windows and door, patching the roof. Then she would need to think about the barn, about fencing, about planting. It was too late in the season for most crops, but she could put in a fall garden. And she would need animals eventually, chickens for eggs, maybe a cow for milk, a few pigs. When she returned to the hotel, tired and dusty, she found a note had been slipped under her door. It was from Preston Quinn, written in a neat, clear hand. "Miss Sutton, I have been thinking about your situation and may have a proposition that would benefit us both. If you are interested, please stop by the store tomorrow morning. Preston Quinn." Helena read the note twice, trying to imagine what kind of proposition he might have in mind. She was wary of offers of help that came with strings attached, but there had been something straightforward about Preston Quinn that made her willing to at least hear him out. The next morning, she went to the store just after it opened. Preston was alone behind the counter, checking inventory in a large ledger. He looked up when she entered and set down his pen. "Miss Sutton, thank you for coming. Your note mentioned a proposition." Preston came around the counter. He looked slightly nervous, which Helena found oddly reassuring. "I will be direct. I have been thinking about your property and what you are trying to accomplish. I believe it can be done, but not by one person working alone. You need help, at least to get started." "I cannot afford to hire help, Mr. Quinn. I have already stretched my funds thin just buying supplies." "I know. That is why I am proposing something different. I would like to help you get your homestead up and running in exchange for a small percentage of your first year's harvest, and, well, the opportunity to spend time with you." Helena blinked, surprised by the latter part of his statement. "I do not understand." Preston ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture that suggested he was choosing his words carefully. "I have lived in Columbia for most of my life, Miss Sutton. I have watched dozens of people try to make a go of homesteading, and I have seen what separates those who succeed from those who fail. The ones who succeed are not necessarily the strongest or the smartest. They are the ones who are willing to work hard and who have help when they need it. You strike me as someone who is willing to work hard, but you are trying to do this entirely alone, and that is a mistake. And you want to help me out of the goodness of your heart. No, he said honestly. I want to help you because I have resources you need, and because I find myself wanting to know you better. The truth is, I have not been able to stop thinking about you since you rode into town. There is something about you, Miss Sutton, a strength that most people are going to call stubbornness, but I do not see it that way. I see someone who knows what she wants and is willing to fight for it. That is rare, and it is attractive. Helena felt her cheeks warm slightly. She was not accustomed to such direct compliments, especially not from men she barely knew. Mr. Quinn, I appreciate your honesty, but I am not looking for a husband. I am here to build a life for myself, on my own terms. I am not proposing marriage, Miss Sutton. I am proposing help and perhaps courtship. Getting to know each other. If nothing comes of it beyond friendship and a business arrangement, then so be it, but I would regret not at least trying. Helena studied him. He was handsome in a quiet way, with brown hair that tended to fall across his forehead, honest hazel eyes, and a solid build that suggested he was no stranger to physical work. More importantly, there was a steadiness about him that appealed to her. He was not trying to charm her or overwhelm her. He was simply stating his case and leaving the decision to her. What exactly would this help entail? She asked. Preston seemed to relax slightly. I can come out to your property on Sunday afternoons when the store is closed. I can help with repairs, with building, with whatever needs to be done. I am handy with tools and I know construction. I can also give you advice on what to prioritize, what supplies you will need, how to make your money stretch further. In exchange, I would ask for, say, 10% of whatever you harvest in the first year, and the chance to court you if you are willing. 10% is fair, Helena said slowly. But as for the courtship, I cannot promise anything beyond allowing you to visit and getting to know you. I will not be rushed or pressured into anything. That is all I am asking. Helena extended her hand and Preston shook it. His grip was firm and warm, and Helena felt a small flutter in her chest that she firmly ignored. This was a business arrangement, she told herself. Nothing more. Then we have a deal, Mr. Quinn. Preston, please. Then you should call me Helena. That Sunday afternoon, true to his word, Preston rode out to Helena's property with a wagon full of tools and lumber. Helena had spent the previous 2 days cleaning the house from top to bottom, hauling out debris, scrubbing surfaces, and killing more spiders than she cared to count. The place was still rough, but it was at least clean. Preston surveyed the house with a critical eye, then nodded. It is better than I expected. The frame is solid, the foundation is good. We can fix this. They worked through the afternoon, starting with the most critical repairs. Preston showed Helena how to replace the broken window panes with oiled paper as a temporary measure until she could afford glass. They repaired the door, planing down the edge that had swollen and rehanging it so it closed properly. They patched the worst holes in the roof with spare shingles Preston had brought. As they worked, they talked. Preston asked about her journey from Sacramento, and Helena found herself telling him about her father, about the years of moving from place to place, about her determination to finally put down roots. Preston, in turn, told her about his family's arrival in Columbia, about watching the town grow and change, about his dreams of one day owning a ranch of his own. Then why help me instead of working toward your own place? Helena asked as they took a break to drink water in the shade. Preston was quiet for a moment. My father is sick. He does not talk about it much, but I can see he is getting worse. My mother needs me at the store, and my younger siblings are still too young to take over. I have responsibilities that keep me tied to town for now. But that does not mean I cannot help someone else achieve what I hope to achieve someday." There was no self-pity in his voice, just acceptance. Helena respected that. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Helena worked on the property every day from sunrise to sunset, doing everything from clearing brush to mending fences to planting a late summer garden. Preston came every Sunday, and sometimes on Wednesday evenings if he could get away from the store. Together, they made progress that would have been impossible for Helena alone. Preston taught her how to build a proper chicken coop, and Helena bought 6 hens from a farmer on the outskirts of town. Within a week, she was collecting eggs every morning. They repaired the usable half of the barn and built a small paddock for Juniper. They dug a proper well closer to the house, so Helena did not have to carry water from the creek for every household need. As they worked, Helena found herself looking forward to Preston's visits in a way that went beyond the practical help he provided. He was good company, easy to talk to, with a dry sense of humor that often caught her by surprise. He treated her as an equal, never talking down to her or suggesting that tasks were too difficult for her to manage. When she made mistakes, he corrected her gently, and when she succeeded, he was generous with his praise. One evening in late August, as they sat on the newly repaired porch watching the sun set, Preston said, "You have done something remarkable here, Helena. In just a few weeks, you have turned a wreck into a home." Helena looked at the house, seeing it with fresh eyes. It was still rough around the edges, still clearly a work in progress, but it was hers, and it was beginning to feel like a place where she could build a life. "I could not have done it without your help. You could have. It would have taken longer and it would have been harder, but you would have found a way. That is who you are." Helena turned to look at him. The setting sun painted his face in warm tones, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the gentle expression in his eyes. "Why are you so certain about me?" "You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you wake up every day and work until your hands bleed. I know you do not give up when things are hard. I know you have a vision of what you want your life to be, and you are building it piece by piece. That tells me everything I need to know." There was a weight to his words, an intensity that made Helena's breath catch. She had been carefully keeping her feelings in check, treating their arrangement as the business deal it was supposed to be. But sitting here with him in the golden light of sunset, she could not deny that something had shifted. She cared about him. She looked forward to seeing him. She found herself thinking about him when she should be thinking about crop rotations and fence posts. "Preston," she said softly, "I need to be honest with you. I am afraid." "Of what?" "Of letting myself care too much, of depending on someone and then losing them. My mother died. My father died. Everyone I have ever loved has left me one way or another. I came here to build something that was mine alone, something that could not be taken away." Preston reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "I cannot promise I will never leave you, Helena. None of us can make that promise because we do not know what the future holds. But I can promise that I will not leave by choice. I can promise that what I feel for you is real. And I can promise that I am not trying to take anything away from you. What you have built here is yours. I just hope you might let me be part of it." Helena looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers. She had been alone for so long, had relied on herself for so long, that the idea of letting someone in was terrifying. But it was also thrilling in a way she had not expected. "I would like that," she said finally. "I would like you to be part of it." Preston's smile was like sunrise, slow and warm and illuminating. He lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so tender that Helena felt tears prick at her eyes. As summer turned to fall, their relationship deepened. Preston still came on Sundays and Wednesday evenings, but now they made time for more than just work. They would walk down to the creek and sit on the bank, talking about everything and nothing. Preston brought her books from his family's collection, and Helena read to him in the evenings by lamplight. They attended a church social together in town, and Helena felt a warm glow of pride when Preston introduced her as his intended. Of course, not everyone in Columbia was happy about their courtship. Margaret Quinn had warmed to Helena after seeing how hard she worked and how much she clearly cared for Preston. But there were others who whispered that Helena was too independent, too unladylike, that she was not a suitable match for the eldest Quinn son. One Saturday morning in September, Helena came into town for supplies and overheard two women talking outside the general store. "I just do not understand what Preston sees in her," one woman said. "She dresses like a man half the time, and she has no sense of propriety. Living out there all alone, it is scandalous." "She is after his money, mark my words," the other woman replied. "She knows the Quinn family is well off, and she is using her feminine wiles to trap him." Helena felt anger rise in her chest, hot and fierce. She wanted to march over and tell those women exactly what she thought of their small-minded gossip. But before she could move, Preston emerged from the store, his expression thunderous. "Mrs. Patterson, Mrs. Cole," he said, his voice cold. "I believe you have better things to do than spread lies about a good woman. Helena Sutton is worth 10 of most people in this town, and if you cannot see that, then I pity you." The two women sputtered protests, but Preston had already turned away. He saw Helena standing near the corner of the building and walked over to her. "How much of that did you hear?" he asked. "Enough. You did not have to defend me." "Yes, I did, and I will do it again every time someone speaks ill of you." He took her hand, right there on Main Street where anyone could see. "I love you, Helena. I have been falling in love with you since the day you rode into town with your spine straight and your eyes full of determination. I do not care what anyone else thinks. I only care what you think." Helena felt her breath catch. They had been dancing around these feelings for weeks, both of them knowing but neither saying. "I love you too. I tried not to, but I do." Preston laughed, a joyful sound that made several passers-by turn to look. "You tried not to." "That is the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me." "I am not good at romance," Helena admitted. "I am better with fences and chickens." "Then we will build a life with fences and chickens and love. How does that sound?" "Perfect," Helena said. "It sounds perfect." In October, Preston asked Helena to marry him properly, with a ring his grandmother had left him. They were sitting by the creek, watching the leaves turn gold and orange, when he pulled the small box from his pocket. "I know we have been moving fast," he said. "I know we have only known each other a few months, but I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life with you if you will have me. Will you marry me, Helena?" Helena looked at the ring, a simple silver band with a small garnet, then at Preston's hopeful face. Every practical bone in her body told her to be cautious, to wait longer to protect herself. But her heart, that traitorous organ she had tried so hard to guard, was screaming yes. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married in the small church in Columbia on a Saturday in late November. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, with Margaret Quinn crying happy tears and Preston's younger siblings standing as witnesses. Helena wore a dress she had made herself from fabric Preston had given her, cream-colored wool with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Preston wore his best suit, and when he saw Helena walking down the aisle, his eyes shone with such love that several people in the congregation had to wipe their own eyes. After the ceremony, there was a celebration at the Quinn home, with food and music and dancing. Helena, who had attended few social gatherings in her life, found herself swept up in the joy of it. She danced with Preston, with his father who was having a good day despite his illness, with the neighbors who had driven in from surrounding homesteads. As the evening wound down and they prepared to return to Helena's homestead, now their homestead, Preston pulled her aside. "Are you happy?" he asked. Helena looked at him, at this man who had seen strength where others saw stubbornness, who had helped her build not just a home but a future, who had loved her for exactly who she was. "I am happier than I ever thought possible," she said honestly. They rode back to the homestead together under a sky full of stars, Juniper and Preston's horse walking side by side. When they reached the house, Preston carried Helena over the threshold, laughing when she protested that she was perfectly capable of walking. "Let me have this," he said. "Let me feel like a romantic hero just for tonight." Their first winter together was hard but beautiful. The storms were fierce, and there were days when they could not leave the house. But those days became precious in their own way. They would huddle near the stove, reading to each other, planning for the spring, making love under piles of quilts while the wind howled outside. Preston moved most of his belongings to the homestead, but still went into town 3 days a week to help at the store. His father's condition had stabilized somewhat, and his younger brother Timothy was proving capable of handling more responsibility. This gave Preston more time to focus on the ranch, which was beginning to take real shape. In the spring, they bought their first cow, a gentle Jersey named Buttercup who provided rich milk. Preston built a proper dairy shed, and Helena learned to make butter and cheese. They planted a large garden, and this time Helena knew exactly what she was doing. They bought 6 more chickens and a rooster, and soon they had chicks peeping around the yard. One morning in May, Helena woke up feeling queasy. At first she thought she had eaten something that disagreed with her, but when the nausea continued for several days, Margaret Quinn took her aside during a Sunday dinner and asked gently if there was any chance she might be expecting. Helena had not allowed herself to think about it, but once the possibility was voiced, she knew it was true. She told Preston that evening as they walked down to the creek, their special place for important conversations. "I think I am with child," she said simply. Preston stopped walking and turned to her, his face cycling through surprise, joy, and concern in rapid succession. "Are you certain, not completely but fairly certain? Your mother thinks so too." Preston pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "This is wonderful. This is everything. Are you not worried? A baby is a big responsibility, more mouths to feed." "I am not worried. We will manage, just like we have managed everything else, together." Their son was born in January of 1878, during a cold snap that froze the water in the well and covered everything in a layer of ice. The birth was long and difficult, with Margaret Quinn and a midwife from town attending. Preston waited outside the bedroom door, pacing and praying, until finally he heard the thin wail of a newborn. Margaret emerged with tears in her eyes. "You have a son, Preston, and Helena is tired but well." Preston went into the bedroom where Helena lay propped up on pillows, exhausted and pale but smiling. In her arms was a tiny bundle, and when she folded back the blanket, Preston saw his son's red face and tiny fists. "He is perfect," Preston whispered. "He is loud," Helena said, but her voice was full of love. "I think we should name him James, after my father." "James Preston Quinn," Preston said, testing the name. "I like it. Baby James was a good child, healthy and strong." He had Preston's brown hair and Helena's green eyes, and he seemed fascinated by everything around him from the moment he could focus. Helena adjusted to motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else. though she found it more challenging than any fence she had ever mended or any crop she had ever planted. Preston was a devoted father, coming home from the store every day eager to hold his son, to rock him to sleep, to sing him nonsensical songs that made Helena laugh. The homestead continued to thrive. They bought more cattle, expanded the garden, built a smokehouse for preserving meat. What had started as a broken-down shack was now a working ranch, and the 160 acres that had seemed like such a gamble were proving to be everything Helena's father had dreamed they could be. In the summer of 1879, Preston's father passed away peacefully in his sleep. It was expected but still heartbreaking, and Preston grieved the loss of the man who had taught him how to be honest, hardworking, and kind. After the funeral, there were discussions about the future of the store. Timothy wanted to take it over, and after much deliberation, the family decided to let him do so. Preston would still be a partner and would help when needed, but his primary focus would be the ranch. "Are you certain about this?" Helena asked him one evening as they sat on the porch watching James toddle around the yard chasing chickens. "The store has been your family's livelihood for so long." "I am certain. The store will always be there if we need it, but this ranch, this life we have built, this is what I want. This is where I am meant to be." As the years passed, the ranch continued to grow. They bought more land adjacent to their original property, expanding to nearly 300 acres. They built a new house, larger and more comfortable, though they kept the original structure as a storage shed and a reminder of where they had started. They hired a ranch hand named Miguel, a young man from Mexico who was skilled with horses and cattle and who became almost like family. In 1881, Helena gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Clara Marie. She had Preston's hazel eyes and Helena's auburn hair, and she was as spirited as James was thoughtful. 2 years later came another son, Samuel, who was quieter than either of his siblings and who seemed to have inherited Helena's love of the land. Helena's life was full in ways she had never imagined. There were hard times, certainly. Droughts that killed crops, cattle that died of disease, winters that seemed to last forever. But there were far more good times. Birthdays celebrated with cakes and laughter. Christmas mornings with homemade toys and stockings hung by the fireplace. Summer evenings, when the whole family would go down to the creek, to swim and splash and be together. One afternoon in the fall of 1885, when James was 7, Clara was 4, and Samuel was 2, Helena stood on the porch of their home and looked out at the land she had claimed alone almost a decade earlier. Preston came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything. How different my life is from what I expected when I rode into Columbia all those years ago. How much has changed." "Are you happy with how things turned out?" Helena turned in his arms so she could face him. There were lines around his eyes now, a few threads of silver in his hair. He had aged as she had aged, but to her he was still the man who had seen her strength when others saw only stubbornness, who had offered help without trying to control, who had loved her for exactly who she was. "I am more than happy," she said. "I am blessed. I came here alone, determined to need no one, and instead I found you and we built this life together. I could not have imagined anything better. I love you, Helena Quinn. I love you too." Their children grew up working the ranch, learning from both their parents the value of hard work and the importance of family. James was the first to learn to ride Juniper, who was now old and gentle, perfect for a child. Clara was fearless, climbing trees and helping with the cattle roundups long before she was old enough to be truly useful. Samuel was the quiet one, but he had a gift for understanding animals and could calm a frightened horse with just his voice. In 1889, when James was 11, he came to his parents with a question. "Father, Mother, I have been thinking. Our ranch has done well, but it does not have a name. Should we not call it something?" Preston and Helena looked at each other. It was true that they had never formally named the property. It was just home, just the ranch. "What do you think we should call it?" Helena asked. James thought for a moment. "What about Juniper Creek Ranch, after Mother's horse and the creek that runs through our land?" They were both here at the beginning. Helena felt tears prick at her eyes. Juniper was now 20 years old, ancient for a horse, and spent most of her days in a comfortable paddock eating grass and being spoiled by the children. She had carried Helena faithfully all those years ago, had been her companion through lonely days, had brought her to this place where she had found everything she had been looking for without knowing she was looking. "Juniper Creek Ranch," Preston said, testing the name. "I like it." "What do you think, Helena?" "I think it is perfect." They had a sign made and hung it at the entrance to their property. Juniper Creek Ranch, ESD, 1876. It became a source of pride for the whole family, a symbol of what they had built together. As the 1890s began, the ranch was thriving. They had over 100 head of cattle, dozens of chickens, several pigs, and a reputation throughout the county for quality livestock and honest dealing. Preston had fulfilled his dream of being a rancher, and Helena had proved that a woman could build a homestead and make it succeed. But beyond the material success, what mattered most was the love that filled their home. Preston and Helena had built more than just a ranch. They had built a family, a legacy, a life full of meaning and purpose and joy. In the spring of 1892, Juniper died peacefully in her sleep. She was 23 years old, an impressive age for a horse. Helena found her lying in her favorite spot in the paddock, looking for all the world as if she was just resting. She knelt beside the old mare and stroked her neck, remembering the day her father had given Juniper to her, the long journey from Sacramento, the way she had trusted this horse to carry her into an unknown future. "Thank you," Helena whispered. "Thank you for everything." They buried Juniper on a hill overlooking the creek, with a simple marker. The children picked wildflowers and laid them on the grave, and Preston held Helena as she cried, mourning not just the horse but everything Juniper represented. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, James approached them with a young mare he had been training. She was chestnut, like Juniper had been, with a white blaze on her forehead and intelligent dark eyes. "Mother," James said, "I have been working with this horse for months. She is gentle and smart and strong. I thought maybe you would like to have her. We could call her Juniper to remember." Helena looked at her son, now 14 years old and tall and responsible, and felt her heart swell with love. "I would like that very much. But let us call her June, her own name, her own identity. Juniper will always be Juniper, and this mare deserves to be her own horse." James smiled. "June, I like it." The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows. Margaret Quinn passed away in 1894, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. Timothy married a schoolteacher named Abigail and took over the store completely. Miguel married a local woman and built a house on the far corner of the ranch property, raising his own family while continuing to work as foreman. James grew into a fine young man, thoughtful and hardworking, with his father's steadiness and his mother's determination. At 19, he married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, and they built a house on Juniper Creek land, starting their own family while working alongside Preston and Helena. Clara, spirited and independent like her mother, announced at 16 that she wanted to go to San Francisco to train as a nurse. It was a difficult decision for Helena and Preston to let her go, but they had raised their children to follow their dreams, and they supported her choice. She returned 2 years later, fully trained, and opened a small clinic in Columbia, serving the townspeople and the surrounding ranches. Samuel, the quietest of the three, turned out to have a gift for breeding horses. He started a small operation on the ranch, carefully selecting and raising horses that became sought after throughout the region. In 1898, Preston and Helena celebrated their 23rd wedding anniversary. They rode out together to the creek, just the two of them, and sat on the bank where Preston had proposed so many years earlier. "You remember what I said to you that first time I saw you?" Preston asked. Helena thought back. "You said I looked tired." Preston laughed. "Before that, I said to my brother that you looked like trouble, but that was not true. What I really thought was that you looked strong. Everyone else saw a stubborn woman who did not know her place, but I saw someone who knew exactly what she wanted and was willing to work for it. I saw someone remarkable." "You changed my life," Helena said softly. "I came here thinking I had to do everything alone, that needing help was weakness. You taught me that there is strength in letting people in building something together. I am grateful every day that you saw something in me worth knowing." "Worth loving," Preston corrected. "Worth spending a lifetime with." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the water flow over the rocks, listening to the birds in the trees. The creek had been here long before them and would be here long after. But for this moment, this perfect moment, it was theirs. As the new century approached, Juniper Creek Ranch stood as a testament to what two people could build when they worked together, loved deeply, and never gave up. The original 160 acres had grown to nearly 500. The shack had become a thriving homestead with multiple buildings and a beautiful main house. The woman who had ridden into town alone and the man who had seen her strength had created something lasting and real. On New Year's Eve, 1899, the whole family gathered at the main house to celebrate the turn of the century. James and his wife were there with their 3 children. Clara had brought her husband, a doctor she had met in San Francisco. Samuel was there with his fiancée. Miguel and his family joined them. The house was full of noise and laughter and love. At midnight, as fireworks lit up the sky over Columbia, Preston and Helena stood on their porch, hand in hand, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built. "To the next century," Preston said, raising a glass of champagne. "To us," Helena added. "To family, to love, to this life we have made together." They kissed, just as they had on their wedding day 24 years earlier, and the assembled family cheered. In the early months of 1900, James approached his parents with news. His eldest daughter, 10-year-old Emma, had been asking about the history of the ranch, about how it all started. "She wants to know the story," James said. "About how you rode into town alone, Mother, and how you and Father built all of this from nothing. Would you tell her?" That Sunday afternoon, Helena sat with Emma on the porch of the original house, the one that had been such a wreck when Helena first arrived. It was clean and sturdy now, used for storage and occasionally as a guest house, but it still held echoes of those early days. "Your grandfather, James, who you are named after, won this land in a card game," Helena began. "He told me it could be something real if someone was willing to work for it. When he died, I decided that someone would be me." She told Emma about the long ride from Sacramento, about arriving in Columbia alone, about the skepticism and doubt she had faced. She told her about the first time she saw the property and how her heart had sunk. And then she told her about Preston. "He saw something in me that most people missed," Helena said. "Everyone else thought I was just being stubborn, that I did not know my place, that I would fail. But your grandfather, Preston, he saw strength. He saw someone worth helping, worth knowing, worth loving. And together, we built all of this. Emma listened with wide eyes. "Were you scared?" "Terrified," Helena admitted. "But sometimes you have to do the scary thing because it is also the right thing. I wanted a life of my own, a place where I belonged. And I found that here. But more than that, I found your grandfather. I found family. I found home." Preston, who had been listening from inside the doorway, came out and sat beside them. "Your grandmother is being modest. She did most of the work those first months. I just helped where I could." "That is not true," Helena protested. "I could not have done it without you." "Maybe we both needed each other," Preston said, taking her hand. "Maybe that is what love is. Not one person rescuing another, but two people choosing to build something together." Emma thought about this. "I think that is nice. I hope I find someone like that someday." "You will," Helena assured her. "And when you do, remember that real love is not about someone trying to change you or control you. It is about finding someone who sees who you really are and loves you for it." As the years went by, more grandchildren came. The ranch continued to thrive under the management of James and Samuel, with Preston and Helena taking on advisory roles. They had earned their rest, though neither of them was content to sit idle. Helena still tended her garden, now famous throughout the county. Preston still consulted on major decisions and loved working with the horses alongside Samuel. In 1905, when they were both in their early 50s, Preston and Helena took a trip back to Sacramento, retracing the route Helena had ridden alone so many years before. They stayed in the Silver Star Hotel in Columbia, the same one where Helena had spent her first nights in town. "It feels strange being here instead of at the ranch," Helena said as they prepared for bed. "Good strange or bad strange, just strange. The ranch is home now. This place, Columbia, it is where our story began, but the ranch is where we made our life." Preston pulled her close. "I have loved every moment of it, every hard day, every triumph, every challenge, because I got to face it all with you." Helena kissed him, long and deep, and they made love in that hotel room with the tenderness of long practice and the passion that had never quite faded. The next morning they rode out to the ranch together, and as they approached the property line with its sign reading Juniper Creek Ranch, Helena felt a profound sense of contentment. This was home. This was family. This was the life she had fought for and built, hand in hand with the man who had seen her for who she truly was. As they grew older, Preston and Helena became beloved figures in the community. They were known for their fair dealings, their generosity, and the obvious love they still had for each other even after decades of marriage. Young couples would sometimes ask them for advice, and their answer was always some variation of the same thing. See each other clearly, work together, never stop choosing each other. In 1910, Preston developed a persistent cough that worried Helena. She convinced him to see Clara, who examined him thoroughly and prescribed rest and a tonic. The cough eventually passed, but it was a reminder that they were no longer young, that time was precious. They made a point of spending more time together, just the two of them. They would ride out to the creek, their special place, and remember. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, holding hands, watching the grandchildren play. They would dance in the kitchen when no one was watching, Preston humming the same tune he had hummed at their wedding reception. "I have had a good life," Preston told Helena one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "A blessed life, and it has all been because of you." "We built it together," Helena reminded him. "Everything we have, everything we are, we did it together." "Still," Preston said, "I am grateful. For that day you rode into town, for every day since." In 1915, they celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a couple of great-grandchildren. The ranch now spanned over 700 acres and was one of the most successful in the region. But the true measure of their success was not in acres or cattle. It was in the love that filled every corner of the property, in the family they had raised, in the legacy they had created. Helena was 63 years old and Preston was 65, both still sharp and active, though they moved more slowly than they once had. They sat at the head of the table during the anniversary celebration, watching the chaos of family with contented smiles. James stood to give a toast. "To my parents, who taught us all what real love looks like, who showed us that strength comes in many forms, that stubbornness can be a virtue, and that the best things in life are built together. Happy anniversary." Everyone raised their glasses, and Helena felt tears on her cheeks. Preston squeezed her hand under the table and she squeezed back. That night, as they prepared for bed, Preston said, "I have been thinking. We should write it all down, our story. How we met, how we built the ranch, all of it, for the grandchildren and their children. So they know where they came from." "That is a good idea," Helena agreed, "though I am not much of a writer. Then we will do it together, just like everything else." Over the following months, they spent many evenings sitting together, Preston writing in a leather-bound journal while Helena talked, remembering. They filled page after page with their story. Helena's arrival in Colombia, Preston's decision to help her, the building of the ranch, the birth of their children, the joys and sorrows and everything in between. When they finished, they gave the journal to James for safekeeping. "This is for all of you," Helena said. "So you always remember that the life you have was built on love and hard work, and two people who were willing to take a chance on each other." The years continued to pass gently. Preston's health began to decline in his early 70s, though he remained active and engaged with the ranch. Helena stayed strong, still working in her garden, still riding June, now also an old mare but faithful and steady. In the spring of 1922, Preston became seriously ill. It started as a cold but developed into pneumonia, and despite Clara's best efforts, he grew weaker. The family gathered, knowing the end was near. Helena sat by his bedside day and night, holding his hand, talking to him, remembering with him. On a quiet Tuesday morning, with the sun streaming through the windows and Helena's hand in his, Preston passed peacefully away. He was 72 years old. Helena felt as if a part of her own heart had stopped beating. For 46 years, Preston had been her partner, her love, her companion. They had built a life together, faced challenges together, celebrated triumphs together. The thought of continuing without him seemed impossible, but she had children who needed her, grandchildren who loved her, a ranch that still required attention. And she had made Preston a promise in those final days that she would keep living, keep enjoying the life they had built together. The funeral was held at the church in Columbia, and it seemed like the whole town attended. People came from all over the county to pay their respects to a man who had been known for his honesty, his kindness, and his devotion to his family. Helena stood dry-eyed through the service, supported by her children, drawing strength from the same place she had always drawn it, from within herself. After Preston's death, Helena moved into the smaller house with James and his family. The main house held too many memories, and she could not bear to be there alone. But she remained involved with the ranch, offering advice, teaching the great-grandchildren about gardening and animals and the importance of hard work. She often rode out to the creek, to the spot where she and Preston had spent so many important moments. She would sit on the bank and talk to him as if he were still there, telling him about the children, about the ranch, about her day. It brought her comfort to feel close to him in that place. Helena lived for another 12 years after Preston's death, dying peacefully in her sleep in 1934 at the age of 82. In those years, she had seen the ranch continue to thrive under James's and Samuel's management. She had held more great-great-grandchildren than she could count. She had seen the legacy she and Preston had created continue to grow and flourish. She was buried next to Preston in the Columbia Cemetery, under a simple headstone that read, Helena Quinn, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She built a life with love and determination. At the funeral, Emma, now in her 40s with children of her own, stood to speak. My grandmother once told me that real love is about finding someone who sees who you really are and loves you for it. She and my grandfather had that kind of love, and because they did, all of us are here. This ranch, this family, this legacy, it all started with a woman who rode into town alone and a man who saw strength where everyone else saw stubbornness. They chose each other, and in doing so they gave us all a gift. The gift of family, of belonging, of home. The family continued to run Juniper Creek Ranch for generations. The journal Preston and Helena had written became a treasured family heirloom, passed down and read to each new generation. The story of how Helena had arrived in Columbia alone, and how she and Preston had built a life together, became part of the family mythology, a reminder of where they came from, and what was possible when people loved each other truly, and worked together toward a common dream. The original house, the one Helena had first seen as a wreck, was preserved as a historic building. It stood as a testament to the beginning of something extraordinary, a symbol of perseverance and love and the transformative power of seeing someone's true strength. And through it all, through the passing years and changing times, the creek continued to flow constant and clear, just as the love between Helena and Preston had been. Steady, strong, and eternal.